Brett Sockold here, helping you make every class Catholic. I'm in Kansas City, where I'm working this week. Today, I had a training session with principals and vice principals who are going to lead the small groups tomorrow. So I'll give the keynote, and then I have to hop on a plane, and the principals and vice principals are going to lead the small groups. But it also means they're going to be well set up to do follow through because I can't stay here forever. And so we did some training with them today, and I just want to share a couple of ideas that emerged in that training that were exciting for me. So one of the questions I'll ask when I'm working with teachers on this question of how do I approach my subject area from a Catholic point of view is, what does the fact that humans do this activity, right? Humans play volleyball. Humans balance books. Humans do a bunch of, humans make technology. What does it mean that we are the kind of creature that do these kinds of things? And very often when you start exploring that question, you'll find something very interesting at the heart of it. Someone said, well, humans make cars. Well, that's really interesting because humans make cars, so we want to get somewhere. But we don't just make cars that will get us from here to there, but we make Ferraris that do things we don't need them to do, right? We're striving for something more. And no other animal is ever going to make like a rocket ship, right? If its natural environment is taking care of its needs for nutrition and reproduction and safety, it's very happy where it is. And humans are like, no, I want to go to the moon. Like, what's that about, right? So anyways, we put this question out, and the groups are discussing it. And one group says, well, we want to think about grammar. And I've had this one before, and people who've been to my talks may have seen me talk about grammar. I do this bit on Friedrich Nietzsche, who has this really interesting quote, "We are not rid of God, we still believe in grammar." So I have stuff prepared to talk about on grammar, but I want to leave the process to work. I don't want to just jump in and give my answer, because I won't learn anything new if I just jump in and give my answer either, and they're not going to build their skills if I jump in and give my answer. So I just sat with them and watched them work it out, and of course the first thing is like, well, it's grammar. Like, what are you going to do? But as they sat with it and talked around, two themes emerged about grammar that were very helpful for thinking about how you might teach it from a Catholic point of view. The first was order. So grammar gives order to our language to make it understandable to our audience, right? So we even talked about how certain kinds of language, which might look less grammatical, actually are maybe just grammatical in different ways. So Ebonics, for instance, is not bad English because it doesn't follow the rules of English. It follows rules, or it would not be comprehensible to speakers and listeners for Ebonics, right? It's derived from English, mostly, right? But it will have a grammar, just like any other sort of dialect or other sort of thing that might be looked down upon as less than the Queen's English, as we would say in Canada, right? And so order was one big theme. But then the next big theme that came up was relationship, right? So we want to communicate, we want to be understood, and we want to have that ordered in order to be able to contribute to the building up of a relationship. So once we had those pieces, right? Once we had at the root of grammar is a desire for relationship and also a need and a desire for order, in communication, then we had something we could work with, right? And then they started thinking about what this might look like in the classroom. What would it mean if, this is one idea that emerged, what if the teacher gave instructions to do something, but scrambled up their syntax? So the words were all out of order so that their meaning was not easily decipherable. And then the students, struggled to do what they're being told to do because they don't understand, and then the teacher at least pretends to get frustrated and upset with them, right? Then they've just had an experience of desiring ordered language, and because they lacked it, and it led to confusion and to breakdown in relationship, right? And so they thought they could frame teaching about grammar in terms of order in communication and relationship, and then they had a very practical idea of how they might start that class to make that point to the students. And then a student had a really neat point that I hadn't heard before. We got talking about grammar in different languages and diversity, and someone brought up the Tower of Babel. Now, I have heard the Tower of Babel before. That tends to come up a lot when we talk about teaching world languages, right? But what this person, so we talked about the Tower of Babel as the problem there is pride, right? And so God divides our languages. And what the scriptural story is indicating there is that pride leads to breakdown in relationship, right? And so the diversity of languages in the Babel story is a symbol for the breakdown of the human community that follows from pride. And then this teacher said, well, I'm learning Spanish right now, and man, does that humble you to have to try to speak in a language that you're not good at with people who are. Right? It's very humbling to have to learn another person's language and to start again from zero. You might speak your own language very well, but to encounter another person and try to work in their language is very humbling. I thought, well, that's a fascinating connection with Babel, where the problem is human pride, right? And so I thought that was just so virtue, right? Humility versus vice, pride, is another key place where you can often find connections. And this was a new one that I hadn't heard before. So I thought that was really great. Another idea that emerged that I thought was really cool, we were talking about adding Catholic content. So a lot of the work I do says, let's learn to think about our subject area or our discipline from a Catholic point of view. And I call that context. Because what we're doing is not only just adding Catholic stuff, right? But sometimes it's good to add Catholic stuff. We should know something of our literary heritage, our artistic heritage, our own history, right? There is a good time and place to add Catholic content in a way that's not arbitrary or forced. But in some subjects, that's trickier. Like math and science, it's harder to find Catholic content. So I said, but sometimes there's like math adjacent or science adjacent content. Things from the history, maybe, of math or science. And one teacher said she had taught a lesson where they were doing biography of scientists. And the students got a list of scientists that they could research. And the teacher didn't tell them that all of the scientists on this list were Catholic, but it emerged slowly because the students had to do presentations. And so they were talking about the biography and the history of these different individuals and their contribution to the history of science and all that kind of stuff. And eventually they were like, oh, a lot of these people seem to have like things in common, one of which seems to be a commitment to faith. And finally, one student said, are all these scientists Catholic, right? And it turns out, yes, they all were Catholic. Now, of course, there's nothing wrong with studying non-Catholic scientists. We do it all the time, and that's great. But what this did, this was in grade 8, right? What this does for grade 8, who's going to hear and has already heard and is going to continue to hear throughout their high school career, that faith and science are opposed to each other. Well, they just had a very concrete experience of a bunch of believing Catholic scientists. And so this idea that faith and science are somehow opposed has a harder time just passing the smell test now, because they've been given sort of the antidote to that false narrative, right? Through their experience. And of course, none of this detracted at all from what they were learning, right? They still learned great things about science and the history of science. It wasn't in some competition with the other goals, the other rightful, legitimate goals of science class, right? All of those are achieved through this means as much as through any other, and maybe more. And so we need to learn that putting the Catholic in there isn't a competition with other stuff. You're still going to get all the content you should have about whatever your topic is, in this case, science, right? So I thought that was a neat science adjacent, I call it, sort of thing. History, biography related to science. So those are two ideas that came up today here in Kansas City that I hope were helpful for you as you work to make every class Catholic.